Let me start with a question. When was the last time you actually read a privacy notice before clicking I agree? Probably never, right? And yet, under the DPDP rules, that notice is the single most important document in the entire relationship between you and the people whose data you collect. That's why we're devoting a whole chapter to Rule 3. Here's what we'll cover together. We'll start with why this rule carries so much weight, because it's easy to dismiss a notice as a formality until you realize it's the legal foundation for everything that follows. Then we'll get into what Rule 3 actually requires, line by line, and why plain language is no longer optional but mandatory. We'll go through the contents your notice absolutely must include, the multilingual and accessibility expectations that trip a lot of people up, and how you've got to surface withdrawal and grievance information right there in the notice itself. After that, we'll dissect a real compliant notice together, piece by piece, so you can see exactly what good looks like. We'll call out the common mistakes that get organizations in trouble, and we'll close with a checklist you can use to audit your own. By the end, you'll never look at a privacy notice the same way again. Let's dive in. So why does the notice matter so much that we are starting our rule-by-rule journey right here? Let me explain it this way. Consent without a proper notice is meaningless. Think about it. If I ask you to agree to something but never tell you what you're agreeing to, your yes is worthless, isn't it? The notice is what makes consent informed. It's the bridge between collecting data and collecting it lawfully. Here's a real-world parallel I think about. When you go in for surgery, the doctor doesn't just shove a form at you and say, sign. A good one explains what they're going to do, the risks, the alternatives. That explanation is what makes your consent real. The DPDP notice plays exactly that role for personal data. And here's why it matters for you operationally. The notice is usually the first thing a regulator will ask to see. It's the most visible, most easily inspected artifact you have. A vague, buried, or incomplete notice is like leaving your front door wide open during an inspection. So when people ask me where to begin with DPDP compliance, I often say, start with your notice. Get that right, and you've laid honest groundwork for everything else. Get it wrong, and every downstream consent is built on sand. Let's get into the substance of Rule 3. Now, this is the official requirement, but let me break it down in simpler words as we go, because the legal phrasing can feel dense. At its core, Rule 3 says that when a data fiduciary asks for consent, it must give the data principal a notice, and that notice has to stand on its own. What does stand on its own mean? It means the notice can't be a tangled clause buried in a 40-page terms of service document. It has to be a clear, understandable, self-contained communication. Think of it like this. If you're inviting someone to a party, you don't hide the date and address in the middle of a long unrelated letter. You put it clearly on the invitation. The notice works the same way. It must be presented separately and clearly enough that the person can actually understand what they're signing up for. Rule 3 also insists the notice be itemized, meaning each purpose for processing is spelled out distinctly, not lumped into one vague blanket statement. And crucially, it must be available in a way the person can access and understand, which brings in language and accessibility. So the heart of Rule 3 is simple to state but demanding to deliver. Tell people clearly, separately, and completely what you're doing with their data. Let's zoom in on two words that do a lot of heavy lifting in Rule 3, plain language and itemized. These aren't decorative, they're enforceable standards. Plain language means writing for an ordinary person, not for a courtroom. Here's a test I use. If your notice contains a sentence that you, the person who wrote it, have to read twice to understand, your customer has no chance. Compare. We may utilize your information for purposes ancillary to service provision. With we use your phone number to send you delivery updates. Same idea, but only one of them respects the reader. Now, itemized disclosure. This means breaking out each purpose separately rather than smuggling everything under one umbrella. Imagine a restaurant bill that just says food tokens cardinal integer 2000 rupees versus one that lists each dish. Which one do you trust? The itemized one, obviously, because you can see exactly what you're paying for. Your notice should give people that same clarity about their data. When I review notices, the biggest red flag is a single line that says, we use your data to improve our services. That tells the person nothing. Break it apart. Are you using it for delivery, for marketing, for analytics? Each gets its own line. Plain and itemized aren't just nice to haves. They're how you prove the consent you collected was genuinely informed. Alright, let's get concrete about what actually has to be inside a compliant notice, because this is where people love to wing it and get burned. Think of this as the checklist of non-negotiables. First, the notice must clearly state the personal data being collected. Not some information, but the actual categories. Your name, your email, your location, whatever it is. Second, it must state the purposes for which that data will be processed. And remember, itemized, each purpose distinct. Third, it has to explain how the data principal can exercise their rights, including the right to withdraw consent. Fourth, it must tell them how to lodge a complaint with the Data Protection Board if something goes wrong. Let me make this real. Picture signing up for a food delivery app. A compliant notice would say, "We collect your name, address, and phone number to deliver your orders. We collect your location to show nearby restaurants. You can withdraw consent here and complain to the board here." See how each element has a job. Here's the instructor's tip. Don't think of these as boxes to tick mechanically. Think of them as the questions a reasonable, slightly suspicious person would ask. What are you taking? Why? How do I stop you? Who do I call if you misbehave? Answer all four clearly, and you've got the backbone of a compliant notice. Here's an area that catches a lot of organizations off guard, especially ones used to operating only in English. India is a country of many languages, and the DPDP framework takes that seriously. Let me put the principle simply. A notice the person can't read is no notice at all. The rules expect that data principals be able to access the notice in a language they understand, drawing on the languages recognized in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Now think about what that means practically. If you're a national app serving users from Tamil Nadu to West Bengal to Punjab, an English-only notice may genuinely fail people who don't read English comfortably. Picture an elderly user in a small town being asked to consent to data processing in a language they can't follow. Is that consent really informed? Of course not. And accessibility goes beyond language. Think about people using screen readers or those with visual impairments. A notice locked inside an image file that a screen reader can't pass excludes them entirely, so the expectation is designed for access. Offer the notice in relevant languages, make it readable by assistive technology, structure it cleanly. Here's how I'd frame it for your team. Don't ask what's the minimum we can get away. Ask who in our user base might struggle to understand this and how do we reach them. That mindset shift is what real accessibility looks like. Let's talk about two things your notice must make easy: withdrawing consent and raising a grievance. And here's the principle I want you to hold on to. Giving consent and taking it back should be equally simple. Why does this matter? Because a lot of organizations make signing up a one-click breeze and then bury the withdrawal option 3 menus deep, hoping you'll give up. Under the rules, that won't fly. The notice itself has to tell people how to withdraw, and the mechanism has to be genuinely accessible. Think of a gym membership that's effortless to join but requires a registered letter and a personal visit to cancel. Frustrating, right? That's exactly the friction the rules are designed to eliminate for personal data. Then there's grievance information. Your notice must point people to how they can raise concerns, both with you and ultimately with the Data Protection Board. Imagine you discover a company is misusing your data and the notice gives you no idea who to contact. You'd feel powerless. The notice closes that gap by handing people a clear path to be heard. Here's my practical advice. Put the withdrawal and grievance details right where people can find them, not in fine print at the bottom. When you make these things visible and easy, you're not just complying, you're signaling that you actually respect the person on the other side. Let's bring all of this together by taking apart a real notice, the way we do it in a workshop. Picture a fictional ride-hailing app called Quick Ride, and let's read their notice as a regulator would. It opens with, "We collect the following personal data," and why. Good start, it's leading with clarity. Then it lists your name and phone number to create your account and contact you, your live location to match you with nearby drivers, your payment details to process fares. Notice what's happening here. Each purpose is itemized, tied to specific data in plain language. No vague to improve services. Next section. You can withdraw your consent at any time from Settings, Privacy, Manage Consent in 2 taps. See how withdrawal is concrete, not theoretical? Then available in English, Hindi, Tamil, and Bengali, addressing the language expectation. And finally, questions or complaints. Contact our grievance officer at this address or escalate to the Data Protection Board here. Every mandatory element is present and findable. Now here's the exercise for you. Pause and pull up your own organization's notice. Read it line by line against what Quick Ride did. Does each purpose stand alone? Is withdrawal genuinely 2 taps or 20? Is the language accessible? This dissection is exactly how you'll spot the gaps before a regulator does. Now let me play the role of the colleague who's seen 100 notices go wrong so you can dodge the mistakes that snare everyone else. The first and most common is the blanket purpose. That single line, "We use your data to provide and improve our services." It feels safe because it's broad, but broadness is exactly the problem. It tells the person nothing specific, so the consent it gathers isn't truly informed. The second mistake is burial, hiding the notice inside a giant terms document where no one will ever find it. Remember, Rule 3 wants the notice to stand on its own. The third is the withdrawal trap, making consent easy to give but a nightmare to take back. Regulators notice that asymmetry immediately. The fourth is the language gap, an English-only notice served to a multilingual user base, quietly excluding the people who most need to understand. And here's a subtle one, the copy-paste import. I've seen organizations lift a GDPR notice wholesale and assume it works for India. It doesn't. The DPDP rules have their own specific requirements, like pointing to the Data Protection Board that a European notice simply won't contain. So before you finalize anything, ask yourself, am I being specific, accessible, honest about withdrawal, and genuinely tailored to these rules? Catch these 5, and you're already ahead of most. Let's close out Rule 3 by turning everything into a checklist you can actually run against your own notice. Think of this as the pre-flight check before you let any notice go live. Start with content. Does your notice clearly state every category of personal data you collect? Does it list each purpose separately, in plain language a non-expert can follow? If you can't tick both of those honestly, stop and fix it first. Next, rights and recourse. Does the notice explain how someone withdraws consent? And is that withdrawal genuinely as easy as giving it? Does it tell people how to raise a grievance with you and how to escalate to the Data Protection Board? Now accessibility. Is the notice available in the languages your actual users speak, not just English? Can assistive technology read it? Then presentation. Is the notice standalone and findable, or is it buried inside a wall of legal text? Finally, the honesty test, and this is the one I tattoo on every reviewer's desk. If an ordinary person read this notice, would they truly understand what's happening to their data? If yes, you're in good shape. If you hesitated even slightly, you've got work to do. Run this checklist every time your data practices change, because a notice is a living document, not a one-time task. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter where we tackle Rule 4 and the world of consent managers.